My name is Mohammed Khan. Many years ago, my job was very simple. Every morning I woke up, all I had to do was think, how can I make life a little bit sweeter? Because I was a sugar beet specialist, and life was indeed sweeter. And then in 2022, I realized Cercospora, which was one of the things I was supposed to control, was becoming resistant to our fungicides, and I decided to what? Eric, you can have my job. I'll go into administration. So at this time, I'm in charge of NDSU extension, making sure our specialists and our agents get the resources so that it can help all our producers. Eric?
Yes, so I'm Eric Branch. I'm the Sugarbeet Extension Pathologist for NDSU and the University of Minnesota. I've been here since 2023, and I represent both universities, both sides of the river, so Minnesota and North Dakota.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sam Markel. I'm also an extension plant pathologist. I am at NDSU, and I work on broadleaf crop diseases, and dry beans are a crop that I care a lot about and I work a lot on. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
I'm Joe Eichley, the extension weed specialist at NDSU. So extension responsibility for all crops except for sugar beet and potato. Then do a lot of research in dry bean weed control as well.
Tom Peters, extension sugar beet, agronomy. So when I came to NDSU, they said, well, we don't need a weed scientist for sugar beets. We've got Roundup Ready sugar beets. So we want you to be more general than that. So I've been an agronomist, but I would say that 95% of the time I'm working on weeds management.
All right, thank you guys. Mohammed, I'll let you kick things off. I know the weed pressure and disease pressure is not going away in either of our crops, so we've got plenty to talk about.
So we'll start by separating them. So we have the weeds guys separate from the disease people.
Intentional.
Yeah. So we'll ask you to very briefly tell our audience what you observed in the field the past year in terms of weed pressure and disease pressure. We'll start with the weeds guy. You, yeah.
So I think the thing that scares me or bothers me the most is it seems with our important weeds, Mohammed, kochia and common ragweed, that they're germinating longer. So years ago, we thought of kochia as an April weed. If you can get through April and we can get 4 leaves on sugar beet, we've got it made. Kochia is germinating deeper into the growing season, and that's concerning. And I can say the same thing about common ragweed as well. It's germinating at the same time in the spring and emerging, but I got a picture from a consultant from common ragweed germinating and emerging in late August. Late August, that's unbelievable. So that to me is the thing that's concerning me, is the time interval that we're seeing weeds germinate and emerge. Joe?
Yeah, I'm going to have a pretty similar story with Tom, and one of the reasons I like to emphasize that is a lot of the best chemistry we have remaining for dry bean, in my case, are the residual products. So it's asking a lot to have a residual herbicide application go on at or near planting and catch common ragweed into mid-July. We tracked emergence in my research site this year that late. And the other thing that may be a little bit different from Tom and I for today's discussion is the grasses. So you can use Roundup in sugar beet, or glyphosate, I should say, in sugar beet. But some of our foxtail populations in our dry bean areas have gotten bad enough to the point where our group 1 and group 2 herbicides that we can use for foxtail control are failing us. So we focus a lot on the broadleaf weeds, but certainly within dry bean, the grass pressure in certain areas is getting to be a little bit difficult to control.
Thank you. Sam?
So looking back in the growing season in 2025, I think there was a range of diseases depending on where you were at, and I think primarily how much water you had. So I think the greatest number of phone calls and conversations I had were actually probably around bacteria blights last year. So, and those occurred where you had hail or high winds with enough water to get that bacteria pathogen moving. And so there's multiple bacteria blights. Common blight is the one that we tended to see the most. I know there's certainly areas where there's plenty of white mold, but there was also areas where we had very little. And the same thing kind of with root rots. The root rots will show up, especially if it's wet early, that we tend to see a lot, or the rotations are tight. So those are the three big things. They're kind of the ones that we typically see. And I think this year was fairly indicative of those three. It just depended a little bit where you were at and when and how much water you had.
All right.
So yeah, sugar beet diseases, same pattern, really varying across the valley and in southern Maine, but overall, if it was wet, that's water. That's going to be that environmental conditions for Cercospora leaf spot. That was the number one concern. Again, 2024, we saw a little higher pressure get ramped up a lot in 2025 from the inoculum, from building up over previous years, and just the weather conditions really were challenging and contribute to those disease outbreaks in the warmer, wetter parts of the region.
So we'll ask you, what will be your take-home message to your producers for next year to prepare for Cercospora?
Yeah, I'm starting here on Cercospora. Yeah, next year, it's going to be the number one thing I can say, and you've all heard this, you all know this, is stay on top of the disease, right? Spray early and spray often. I wish it was that simple, and it sounds simple. It's hard to accomplish given the other constraints on that. On making those spray applications, but getting out before row closure or right around the time of row closure or before, getting that first spray on and getting a head start on disease control, because these fungicides that we have are primarily preventative. Once the disease is in, the inoculum is going to keep building in that field, right? It's hard to catch up, but easier relatively to stay ahead of the game. So. Spray early and spray often, I guess. And it's not easy to say. It's an investment for sure, but to protect that crop and maintain that green canopy as long as possible is important.
Thank you, Eric. I'll be coming back to you later on. Think about spray early, spray often, but how much do we spray, how much money do we spend, and how much do we keep in our own pockets? So, Sam, your thoughts?
You want me to talk about Cercospora? Is that
Yeah, of course. It goes from beet to beans.
I don't know anything about Cercospora. So I think looking forward in dry beans, I think it is important to look back, because there's so much variability in what growers had depending on their location and year. There's a couple things that I think should be front and center of your mind, though. I think if you had bacteria blight, like if you had a good amount of bacteria blight, given the economics of the situation we're in right now, it is important to remember that bacteria blight can survive in the seed. So there might be a little temptation to use seed that you had in previous years. But if you had bacteria blight, that's a very significant risk, right? So the bacterial pathogens survive in that seed for maybe up to 5 years, depending on which pathogen we're talking about. So if you put that in the ground and it grows up and there's the water right away, you could potentially create bacteria blight epidemic. So that's one thing. Bacteria blight survives in residue for a couple of years, but in seed for longer. So just keep that in mind. I think with white mold, all of us know some about white mold, right? Those little black structures survive for many, many years. If you didn't have a lot last year, but you had a lot the year prior, where are you going back into the ground? Just don't forget about it, because it will still be there. If the weather is right, it can show up. Now, it might not show up in as great a severity. The longer you are away from it, the better. But you don't want to forget about it. I think with root rots, there's things that we can do to help root rots. There's some seed treatments, and there's rotation is something that I would maybe emphasize. So crop rotation does make a big difference with root rots. A little bit, be careful with the soybean and dry beans in the same rotation. They're susceptible to some of the same pathogens. I think that's what I would recommend, just top of mind.
Thank you. Joe?
Well, Cercospora, I'm telling you to call these guys.
Not me, just him.
But for weeds, I think for me, it's having the knowledge of what you have in your field, and I'm thinking in terms of herbicide resistance. So we certainly have plenty of that embedded across the whole growing region, but the example I think I'll use is that as waterhemp gets really into the heart of dry bean country, really gets embedded in the northern part of the valley, one of our best post-emergence options in dry beans is Reflex or Famecifin. But we do have resistance to that. And so one example I'll use is there was a wheat field last year where saflufenicil was used pre-harvest and waterhemp went untouched. So we were able to sample that, confirm we had resistance to the group 14 herbicides. So if that was a field going to dry bean, knowing that you have resistance to that can help you plan a little bit better, that you're going to have to rely more on residual herbicides when really the one effective option we have for water hemp within dry bean may not be effective on that field because of that resistance. So we have plenty of tests available for water hemp and kochia. Ragweed is just kind of almost given to, at this point, we have some group 2 resistance and group 14 is spreading. And the grasses, we're working on a genetic test, but for now we still have folks like Kirk Howlett, a weed scientist on campus, who will screen for resistance in foxtail throughout the winter. So I'm going to say knowledge is my number one weapon going into next year.
I want to talk about Cercospora. So here's why. That canopy that you develop in July and August is holding weeds back. So those layers of leaves are preventing some of the late germinators or even some of the water hemp that's small from finding its way through the canopy. So Eric, a strong sugar beet canopy is an integrated approach for weeds management where it's not allowing some of the late germinators or water hemp from getting up into the, above the canopy. So I'm all about a strong canopy, good disease management in sugar beets.
And good late season weed control as well.
That's right.
So we'll start with you, Tom. You guys have been around for some years now. What are some of the exciting products, tools, or practices that you believe will come into play for our producers in the next year or 2 or 3?
So that's tricky. How about if we expand that time horizon to 10 years?
No.
No?
Our producers may not be around in 10 years if they do not have a really good financial returns from there. So that's why I'm asking for this shorter time frame.
Yeah.
And we can be a little bit optimistic in terms of maybe getting a new product registered.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk about some of the work you've been doing.
Okay, so I'm going to do this short term, mid-term, long term, and I'll hold back on the long term. In the short term, we have what we have. So there are no new labels for sugar beets. I may continue to renew the special labels, the 24Cs, the Section 18s, but there's nothing on the 2026 horizon that's going to be different from what we did in 2025. So that means we've got to make those programs work. Midterm, I've spent a lot of time working with Truvera sugar beet, and I am excited about integrating dicamba and glufosinate into the portfolio of products that we use in sugar beets. So how soon? Well, we have to get dicamba reapproved in soybean, Joel, so you can address that. But as soon as we get that done, I think we'll get that label done, and that'll open up the opportunity in sugar beets. And I'll hold back on the longer term.
Thank you.
I'm pretty similar in the short term where we're not going to see the answer come out of a jug. So as far as new products, I can say for corn and soybean, there's really not anything new coming short term, let alone for dry bean. So we may be able to get a current active ingredient on the market and a different use pattern maybe, but we're basically stuck with what we have for chemistry. So that makes the short term a pretty difficult challenge, and I want the guys to still be farming in a couple of years here. It's one of my short term goals. Midterm, if I look at things like the seed and spray technology and other targeted applications, we're still stuck using the same chemicals within that crop, but we can be a little bit more precise about where we place it. And I think one of the less talked about benefits from that technology is we're out there mapping our fields as we're spraying. So in the background, as we're spraying these different areas of the field, we're mapping where the weeds are at. And I think that can help us make better plans for a field once we know the hot spots within that field. So that's just kind of maybe a side benefit to some of the technology we have going. Otherwise, my more hopeful things are more in the long term, but you said we're not allowed to talk about that.
A little bit later. Thank you. Sam?
I think I'm more optimistic than you guys, which is great. So Dr. Juan Osorno, I believe, is talking tomorrow. He's NDSU's dry bean breeder, and there's other bean breeders around, other companies and things. And I have great confidence that the genetics are improving. I know in conversations with Juan, for example, he has several different varieties and a couple different market classes that I wouldn't say they're resistant to bacterial blights, but they are a lot less susceptible than some of the genetics that we've had just kind of recently. He's got at least one pinto that is really resistant to rust, and we haven't seen a lot of rust recently, but when that thing rears up, it is a monster, right? But we have some decent resistance now. So I think the varieties are improving, and some of the genetic breeding that's been done over the last 10, 20 years is starting to bear fruit. So he's got some good advanced lines, and he's got some good releases with resistance genes in it. And I suspect the private sector will have something very similar in various areas. So if you're particularly concerned about one, and I mentioned bacterial blight a couple times, think about looking at the varieties again, because they are improving. I think another thing that is really starting to bear fruit here, or at least in theory, is that we are learning a great deal about optimizing the white mold application. I'm not talking about the specific chemical or whatever that is. It's actually the timing and how much water and when actually to get in there. And a lot of this work is led by Dr. Michael Wunsch in Carrington, but there is a tremendous wealth of knowledge in the last maybe 3 to 7 years that we really can maybe optimize that investment. If you choose to invest in a white mold application, which is often a good investment in a lot of environments, you want the most money for your investment. And we know a little bit better how to do that. We know a lot better how to do that. I think the last thing that I would say is there's been a really pretty significant investment in developing a white mold forecasting model in the soybean world. That is more or less available to dry bean growers now, with the big asterisk that it's not been validated on dry beans, but the conditions are the same. The pathogen is the same. So you're going to be seeing that in the crop and pest report and other areas this spring and this summer promoted for soybeans. But it might be another useful tool dry bean growers could consider, just with the idea that the dry beans are probably a little more sensitive than the soybeans. But it just gives you another tool in the toolbox. So there's kind of 3 things that I think I'm optimistic about in the very short term.
All right, I'm gonna start with the short term too. And the good news is that we have data to support, to help you guys figure out when is not only to show you guys and have you show us that yes, we see great things from staying on top of disease control and maintaining disease control throughout the season. We've got data to show, hey, that's a good decision. That's going to work. That's going to be a return in both recoverable sugar and dollars at the end of the year. So that's the short term. The cooperation from the co-ops and from the university folks working hard at answering this very question. I said spray early, spray often, and it's true. It's more complicated than that. I wish it were that simple for everybody, but the constraints on time and dollars and all the other inputs. But we, for whatever questions you may have of us, we've got the numbers and we will work to get you the answer that suits your operation. Between the huge number of folks working on the sugar beet disease problems. Medium and long term, I again want to point out the innovation that some of it's on display here today, and the seed companies, the chemical companies, no one's sitting back. Everybody's hoping to bring new innovations and working hard at these problems. And when they're out on the market, we'll have the numbers at we want to provide that data so you can make those decisions about your farm confidently. That's my goal. And hopefully that's an upward positive trend. We'll see.
Thank you, Eric. The edible bean producers, Sam, they really like you, and they would like you to give your perspective as to how do you overcome this persistence of white mold in beans year after year after year. What can you do to break this cycle, if anything?
Drought, maybe. I'm just kidding. Yeah, white mold's tough. White mold is not going away, and genetics for white mold, it's a slow progress, and it's a slow progress in every crop that is sensitive to white mold. but they do improve over time. I think the biggest improvement, I kind of already mentioned a little bit about some of the application specifics, maximizing that application. And Michael Vunch at Carrington has got some data that shows, that the same chemistry, done with the same amount of water or whatever, just modifying the timing just a little bit might be a 20% reduction over the disease reduction you would normally get. I mean, it is quite tight. And I fully appreciate the fields are enormous and you can't spray every spot all at once, but maximizing that application and as you pull that trigger, getting all the information you can about whatever nozzle it is, the droplet size, the exact timing, it can make a huge difference. That's a tough one, right? We can't rotate out of white mold, as you know. We don't have fabulous genetics. They're better than they were maybe 20 years ago. We have a good suite of chemicals. There's a good array of fungicides that will work. I think maximizing that application, if you pull the trigger, is probably the best thing we can do at the moment.
Thanks, Sam. So Sam is saying, go to church. Don't pray for a drought. Get moisture and do it on time. So Eric, if you think you're going to get away, my friend, no. The sugar beet producers would like to know, how do you control Cercospora leaf spot and remain financially viable?
Yeah. So Cercospora leaf spot, again, so different than white mold. Cercospora leaf spot is a polycyclic disease. We say the level of spores in the field and is going to increase as the season goes on, and infection can happen anytime from that row closure period all the way to the end of the season. So staying ahead of that control is absolutely essential. I always do encourage that proactive plan, right? Get those earlier fungicide applications on initially right around end of June, row closure for sugar beet growers. And then, maybe it will be dry, right? And stretch that window out to the full 14 days. And if it rains, then we change the plans and shrink that window, cut that window back a few days if we have to. But just staying ahead of it is so important, as you know, Mohammed. But yeah, it's not easy. Other sugar beet diseases, right? Rhizoc, we can plan ahead of the year, get the right genetics, and get some in-furrow fungicides if necessary, right? But Cercospora is that in-season management that it's so easy to look back and say this last year was the environment that really was the challenge, and that's absolutely true. I know growers who did everything by the book. They hit their intervals. They were maxed out on the number of Mancozeb, Manzate applications for the year. But still, just that environment was unforgiving. So if we set ourselves up for a risk-averse year and hopefully the environment cooperates and we do end up with some dollars.
So Eric, it might be useful to remind our producers that fungicides are useful, but we need fungicides as well as genetics. And it might be useful to have all our breeders be invited from the different seed companies to work together to develop improved varieties with multiple genes resistance, and that along with fungicides, we'll probably talk a little bit more about some newer ones coming up, will probably be the best bet to help our producers for the long term. All right, I want you to be a visionary now and tell me about, they already have lots of problems with kochia and waterhemp and ragweed, but what are our producers especially, they like to hear about bad things coming. So what are some weeds that you see coming up in the future that will be difficult to deal with or you are concerned about?
I'm going to do this with you, Joe, because I think we're both on the same page on this one. So it's water hemp that is herbicide resistant. No, I want to say that differently, Joe. Herbicides resistant. So I don't think we're reaching, Joe, when we say that there could be populations with 6, 7, maybe 8-way resistance to herbicides. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, within our geography, maybe not that many yet, but we certainly have 4-way resistant water hemp in our geography. And look to the south, and that's kind of the canary in the coal mine. I can tell you that canary is dead in some areas.
So I fear the day where we don't have effective water hemp control herbicides. What are we going to do then? I mean, that's really a real life situation, Mohammed, and it's something that we have to be thinking about.
Yeah, and we can expand that out to other weeds. I mean, water hemp is probably the top for most folks, or at least many folk in the room. But when I look at something like common ragweed, that we've got some no-win scenarios with common ragweed. Right now, I actually think I have more chemical options for water hemp and dry bean than ragweed with some of our populations.
And I'll flip it over. I have a good herbicide called Stinger and Sugarbeet for common ragweed control, provided we don't have those late germinating, because our label is only through the 8-leaf sugarbeet stage.
Yep. But if we focus on water hemp specifically, the weed science community is focusing a lot more on metabolism resistance to herbicides, and we do have some metabolism resistance to atrazine in the region. So corn product, that's now making it more difficult to control water hemp in corn prior to corn or sugar beet if you're planting that crop right after corn. So even our rotational crops with more options currently, we are having some issues with water hemp.
And I like to say, Joe and Mohammed, that weed management has to be a planned program. So you just don't get up and say it's a good day, let's spray today. It has to be planned out. Think about the crops you're growing, the different products, the rotational restrictions of those products, and thinking about how can I use them in my fields across the rotations to ensure that I'm introducing as much diversity as possible into the products that I'm using.
Yeah, so maybe just to circle back and a pretty pointed answer to the question, it's the weeds we have today. We're just losing options on them.
Yep.
I don't see any new insider coming in and really taking over the geography. Ones we mentioned earlier, kochia, water hemp, ragweed, foxtails. There are worse ones now, and they're just going to continue to get worse. If we don't diversify along the way, like Tom was just mentioning.
Agreed.
Yeah, remember, I see Alan Tucker is here about 10 or 15 years ago, Alan, you were talking about kochia control, and it's still a problem. So this is the reality that our producers are facing. Weeds, the disease guys, what about any new pathogens that you're concerned about? Finding anything new?
Life's good over there, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you asked us to be a visionary, right? So I think we will be kind of like the weeds guys in that, a lot of the common players here, white mold, common blight, root rots, they're not going away. Rust, they will change, where we might see another race change, in a pathogen, meaning that some of the genetics are not effective anymore because the pathogen adapts to them, right? That's the same kind of thing with herbicide resistance or fungicide resistance that we deal with. We anticipate those happening periodically. Those that have grown dry beans for a while would remember that there was a lot of yield loss from rust in the 90s, but somewhere along the late 90s, early 2000s, pretty much all the beans became resistant, and that was because the breeders were putting in a new resistance gene. It's just classical breeding and making them resistant. Well, the race shifted again, and there's kind of back and forth, and so we do see that. I'm a little concerned about soybean cyst nematode, and I've mentioned this multiple times. It's a little microscopic worm that lives in the soil, and it causes lots of problems on soybeans, and we know it can infect dry beans. Now, how much yield loss in dry beans, I think, is still a little unclear, but it is spreading north and west and east into the heart of the dry bean growing area. I'm a little concerned that you have a nematode poking holes in the roots. Well, that surely can't be good for root rots either, so I'm a little concerned about that. But I'm also optimistic that the genetics will continue to improve for everything that I just mentioned, including soybean cyst. At some point, we will have dry beans that are, if not tolerant, maybe not entirely resistant, but certainly less susceptible. I'm optimistic over time that will occur. It's kind of a little bit of a trench warfare would be the analogy pathologists use. The pathogen does something, then we as a community, we do something, and the pathogen will adapt to it. It's back and forth and back and forth. Which I should emphasize makes your investment in research and in the private sector's investment in research really, really important. I mean, without that, we can't do a lot. So I think overall I'm optimistic. I don't like soybean cyst in the area, but that's my thinking.
Yeah, we realize you like the disease for job security, so that's a,
I could do something else, I'm sure, if I had to.
You can go back to football.
Oh, not anymore. No, I'm uncomfortable in this building as it is.
You're younger than that guy who went back and played for Colts a couple days ago.
Yeah, I don't know.
And better condition too. Eric?
Yeah, you know, I think the same story as we see that in sugarbeet too, right? Where no matter the pathogen, our rhizomania, you know, or Cercospora, over both of those overcoming genetic traits or instances of overcoming genetic traits, and that's not a new pathogen, but all of a sudden it's something higher on our radar. Maybe we had a lull for a few years, or you know, overall pretty good genetic control of rhizomania, and we do still have good genetic control, but we pathologists, we're always looking for those cases where something's changing, something's happening. We need to make sure we're aware of what's going on, and we survey the valley. We work with the agriculturalists at the co-ops and the growers. We've got our eyes open for what's new and coming. But for now, you know, like Sam had mentioned, fungicide resistance, you know, we want to make sure that we are continuing to use all the tools we have to manage diseases, especially like Cercospora. So we not a new disease, but a new angle, a new adaptation. That population, it happens all the time. It's happened many times before. It'll happen again. So the more tools we use, the better. And I think we do have tools, and we will hopefully be getting more. But you know, until then, we've got research to show, yes, this is how we use the tools we got. So long story short, I'm a little optimistic, cautiously optimistic, but you know, we're getting there, Sam, too. So
Yeah. I'm really impressed with the group that we have here. You're all listening attentively. Very few of you are going to your phones. In the good old days, we'll read books and we'll talk and get to know about each other. Nowadays, we're kind of burying our heads and we don't even know how to talk to each other. And one of the things that happened with that is our attention span is becoming less and less. And as all of us here are educators, our job is to educate you. How do we grab your attention and keep it? Especially when I read recently, our attention span is only 40 seconds. How can I meet a young lady and say, well, I'd like to have a date with you so I can marry you and tell you that in 40 seconds? So, as extension specialist, what will you like to do to make sure that we can better educate our producers using the tools that we have, all the different tools, knowing that some of us learn by using visuals, some of us like to touch using our kinetic system, some of us like to use audiovisual, some of us like to use all of those. What are your experiences? What would you like to see and to do in the future? Start with Tom.
I was afraid you were going to ask about dating, so I was happy that you pivoted to something else. So and I think people here know this, I like working with farmers. And we're very fortunate in sugar beets in that we have a system where we have ag retailers, we have crop consultants, and we also have agriculturalists that are employees of the various co-ops. And all of them provide me access to farmers. So all of them are multipliers for me. So the net result of all of that is, you know, on my cell phone, I've got 400 names of growers on my phone, and I enjoy that part of the job. Now, I can't talk to 400 people all at once or even in a week, but through the network of what I call multipliers, those other people, we can get our messages out, and we can do that almost on a real-time basis, Mohammed.
Joe?
I'll be pretty similar. I'll just put a different spin on it, I guess. But you know, my daytime job for research is going to be killing weeds. And while I enjoy the heck out of that, I got into this because it's a people business. And that's what's going to continue to help us make success in the future, is whether it's our relationships with people in this room, just, you know, using those personal connections to find the person that you trust and get things done correctly. And I point that out because Tom and I might have a negative spin on things because we drive around and look at all the bad fields out there. I try to do it the other way this year. There's a lot of clean fields out there too, Tom. So there are a lot of folks in this room getting it done right. And all that is because of these personal connections. So, you know, I look at things in the future like AI and you know, there's some I put some things in AI, and it's a B student, sometimes a D student, as far as answering weed control questions. And that can be the difference between a moderately successful weed control program where you killed your crop. So, making sure you have those connections you trust. And right now, I don't trust AI to give me those answers.
Sam?
Well, I'm not going to pretend I have the best answer for this. I think I'd rather hear from the you and the audience how you'd like us to help you the best. I guess in some ways there's no substitute for a handshake and looking somebody in the eye and listening to what they have to say. I mean, you can't replace that. I don't think I care who you are. You can't replace that. That is really important. But in the last 20 years, there's so much noise. In addition to the attention span, there's so much noise. There's so much advertising from various areas. There's so much information. There's AI generated stuff now. Keeping abreast of some simple unified messages, I think, is important for us. So like in my case, it might be really important for me to work with a couple people in the private sector or a couple of companies just to surround ourselves by okay, here's the key point, here's the key point, here's the key point. These are really what we need to know, and build your program around that. But in this unified message, you're more likely to be successful. Almost like a partnership. I think another thing that's important is for each of us to stay flexible and relevant. I have twin 20-year-old daughters, and I'm not even sure what they're doing on their phone half the time, but they're laughing, giggling, watching reels and all that. Well, like I need to be aware of that's modern communication. So I have to be relevant, and I have to listen to them when they tell me, don't do that. You're getting old. So I have to be aware.
So Eric, you being the most junior of this group here, what kind of communication technique you like to use with the producers that those older gentlemen do not normally use?
Oh man, I don't know. I sometimes feel a little old school myself. If anybody wants to get a hold of me, pick up the phone and call. Emails are great, but I'm right there on the phone. I'll text back. Text a grower, text with our stakeholders and everyone. I don't know. Social media. We want to, just like Tom said, we want to use whatever we can to multiply the information that we at NDSU Extension and Minnesota Extension have worked hard to develop for you guys. It's for you all, so we want to do whatever we can to help get that message out to you, and that's our mission to assist in your programs, your farms. So whatever it takes.
So in North Dakota, we have about 796,000 souls, just under 800,000. And individually, we cannot meet all of them. So what you're saying, use all the tools available. One of the good things about North Dakota is the state has made a lot of investment in broadband. So you may be in a rural area, but you still have access to technology. And our specialists, they will have the production guides. All of you use those guides that our specialists produce, all the bulletins. They go on the radio. They record it, so it's there. If you're on your combine and you want to do something else, you can go and use those there. But the most important thing is that you can call somebody or talk to somebody, or when you have the field days, you're there to ask the person what's the best thing to do. So those relationships in extension, as all of these people are, it's all about relationship building, keeping that relationship going. So thank you for that work, and use text, whatever you need to get the work done. Now, earlier Sam had indicated what do we do with the money we get? Another great thing about our region is our producers put their money where their mouth is. Way back in the 1960s, our sugar beet producers went to the legislature in North Dakota and Minnesota. They told the legislature that you need to employ specialists at NDSU. You need to pay them because we're taxpayers, you're using our money. And then we will go in our pocket 1 penny per ton of sugar beet, and we'll use that for research. That is one of the reasons why the sugar beet industry is one of the most viable industry in the US today. The same message has gone on for other commodities, wheat, edible beans, soybeans, etc. So we have checkoff. So if you as researchers and educators, if you had to direct and advise the people who are giving out this money, who are responsible for giving out this money, what will you advise them as to what will be the best investments for the future for the producers for the different crops that we produce, based on your expertise?
I like, so I'll use sugar beets as an example. So we have 1,100,000 acres of sugar beets in the United States, 630,000 in Minnesota and North Dakota. I don't have a lot of clout with the companies, the pesticide companies, because we don't have a lot of acres. Joe has access to a lot more acres than I do. So for me, Mohammed, the commodity groups are the currency that allows us to communicate with different groups that have technology. So maybe it's pesticides, maybe it's AI, maybe it's seed, as you mentioned. And those relationships that we get through Mitch, in the case of dry beans, or through sugar beets, I think are really critical so that we can stay relevant and ensure that we have new technologies for our growers in the future.
Joe, you want to add anything to that?
I think it's just having multiple groups work together as well. So I'll step back and think about soybean just for 1 second. So work with the United Soybean Board, and we've got several projects with 16 different states involved, and they like to see that regional connectivity between weed scientists in that regard. I think about it across disciplines as well. So Sam and I can stand here all day and argue, I want narrow rows, Sam wants wide rows. Because I want canopy closure, he wants to help out with white mold. I know we might be locked into our row spacing based on our planters, but things like that, working across groups, whether it's how can my weed control help disease control, vice versa, and getting agronomy involved. I like those bigger, more collaborative projects because we can kind of get answers that are actually happening in the real world. It just kind of takes opening all those doors and working across disciplines.
Sam, you want some input?
Yeah, I would just add that we collectively work with lots of crop commodity groups in the region, and I'm continually really impressed with how they handle the money and the investments and all the different things the commodity groups that have to address. I think it's really applaudable in my mind because they do a really good job. And one of the things that sometimes not everyone sees is the leveraging potential of that money the commodity groups have, your money, right? So certainly North Harvest can't fund millions and millions of dollars of research, but investing a little bit early in an idea can be leveraged to grab a lot more money to support that concept, whether that's from the federal government or from the private sector. That initial investment is so important, and I think the commodity groups are really good at leveraging that. And that's really impressive in my mind. So that's what I would add.
Thank you. All right.
I absolutely echo all of that, and my only addition is to keep supporting the incremental gains. I think the data are helping to get data that shows, yes, this is a small step, whether it's white mold fungicide, timing, or droplet size, these small things that do add up over time. And even if it's, might not seem like much, but these incremental gains that we know are fairly consistent and are effective, research that supports achieving those incremental gains is gonna help us, get to the next level little by little.
Thank you. I think working with 7 commodity groups and working with the Sugarbeet Research and Education Board as the secretary for many years, I think individually, each one of the commodity groups is doing a great job. But in the future, Mitch, I think it will probably be wise for like the beans people, Joe, the Sugarbeet people, you're growing crops in rotation. And each one of us only speaks about our individual crop. It may be wise sometimes to cross-talk and say, hey, maybe you can put this research proposal probably to the beans people as well, because you have that in a rotation system. And rather than one entity fund it, maybe 2 entities fund it, so you get the research results for everybody for more than one commodity. So overall, those of you who are producers, who are giving your check off, we really appreciate it. And we are #1 for over 10 different commodities in North Dakota. In the good old days, it used to be wheat and flax. We are still king for spring wheat and flax. But we have a whole lot of other crops that if you tell people about North Dakota, what do you know about North Dakota? Oh, you're right next to those Canadians, and Your weather, we all know about it. But guess what? When you tell them you grow chickpeas in North Dakota, they can't believe it. Lentils, honey. That's why we are always having sweet tongues, and we're number one for sugar. So thanks to the commodity groups, thanks to the producers for the money you invest in research and in education. We're also interested in making sure that our researchers who do the basic research, they're also funded, because we cannot do our work without that basic funding research. So it's all needed to come together. This one here is for all of you again. Briefly discuss how you can work with farmers to help them with diagnostic of diseases for the disease guys and weeds. Eric, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so sugar beets, of course, are susceptible to a number of leaf spots, not just Cercospora. And, we have resources online that we've worked to put together to help identify those. I'll make a field visit to help identify those. We'll take leaf samples by mail, whatever it takes to get a quick turnaround on identifying what that is. We have our, in addition to our resources, I guess, the R&E board, the Sugarbeet Research Education Board, funds each year a plant diagnostic clinic run by my colleague, Dr. Ashok Chanda at the University of Minnesota Crookston. So that is the part of his program that focuses solely on diagnosing sugar beet disease samples. And that's been a great resource for growers and co-ops in the region as well.
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit that some of the diagnostics between the diseases is pretty tough, right? I mean, even I'll get confused, and I've seen these things for many, many years. So we have a set of traditional tools, things like this. And if you don't have one of these, they're at the extension booth. Grab one. Where we put all the symptomology and areas of the plant together, so it's easy to flip through. It's like, oh, this is on the leaf. Well, this looks like that, right? I think personally, there's a little bit of a need for more really short videos, little clips to flip through that way. I think we can improve that. We have a plant disease diagnostic lab on campus. So I think they receive maybe 6,000 samples a year, something like that. They're usually fairly quick, and they can assess anything from a tree or a house plant to a field crop, right? And so I wouldn't forget to take advantage of that. I use that. You probably use that too. I mean, we'll go to the lab and okay, we need a little help with this one. So there's a few different ways that we can help.
Joe?
In the weed world, so from a diagnostic standpoint, one thing I've wanted to do for a number of years now, and one of our new agronomists is helping to lead this cause, is a kind of a what's wrong with my plant diagnostic series. It's kind of building off what the pathology group already has, but Cercospora is a question I get every year because maybe we have paraquat drift somewhere. It can look pretty similar. So that's kind of some diagnostic series that we're building. But the other thing I think about is the number of weed ID questions we've gotten over the years has plummeted. And a lot of that has to do with these weed ID apps that are out there. So I said I don't always trust technology, and sometimes those weed ID apps are about a bee student, but they can get you to the family a lot of the time. So they can tell you it's a pigweed. They may not tell you if it's redroot pigweed versus waterhemp. We can at least get to the family, and then it takes just a little bit of extra digging to find out the exact species. So from a weed ID standpoint, when we do scout schools and train scouts each year, I train them how to use those plant ID apps effectively, because you may be a phone call away and that person doesn't answer the phone, but you can get pretty darn close and get a pretty good diagnostic from some of those apps.
Yeah, I got to add on to that. I am so impressed with how interactive those tools are. However, Muhammad, I'm not going to forget about, how we've done it in the past, which is small group meetings. And one of the visitors at the NDSU booth reminded me this morning of when we used to do machine shed meetings. So we'd grow some pots. We'd show them the difference between water hemp, redroot pigweed, maybe one or two other pigweeds, and we did that in a small group basis. So let's not forget about that. It can still be small groups and doing this on a hands-on basis.
Can I add a comment there? Yeah. So one of the things, and I think this is important for every discipline, but probably most significant for diseases, is timing. Right? There's a lot of diseases and a lot of crops, and you might, Eric, has to worry about sugar beets, but you all have to worry about multiple crops and multiple things happening in the year. So learning or paying attention to what is emerging as a disease at a specific time point, and then focusing on just being able to identify that one or two things is really important. And so we try to help you with the crop and pest report, for example. There's 5,000 or 6,000 subscribers to that. And as things are emerging, we'll put pictures up and we'll put simple diagnostics so you can hopefully go out in the field and look right at real time and see if that makes a difference. I think it's a lot to ask somebody to learn all the disease identification for all the crops they grow in a winter month. You can do a lot of good, but I think the timing when things are emerging is really, really important, because if you know it's coming and you can see it and do something about it at that moment, that's where really the value is.
Earlier, the term AI, we're not talking about artificial insemination, artificial intelligence was used. So that's the topic of the day, more or less, the word of the day, or the words of the day. How do you see that playing in your work? How can you use it, artificial intelligence, either now or in the near future in your work?
Yeah, gosh, any tools that can save me time, right? That's the mundane, office-y, administrative tasks that we do. But of course, as long as they're done accurate, and I want to make sure they're done accurate so I don't waste more time than what I had set out to save, right? That's the kind of thing I want to maybe jump out of line here too, but just the tools that AI, machine learning, these tools that can be applied to innovation further down the pipeline, whether that's evaluating potential new fungicide active ingredients. There's another AI, active ingredient. Just farther towards the foundational research process and different ways that these algorithms and the machine learning AI can help make that more efficient and hone in on what may be advantageous once we get to the field scale or get to the field part of it. So that process, I think those tools really have an important place in the pipeline for sure. Of course, it looks different in our day-to-day, but my 2 cents anyway.
Sam?
I might only have 1 cent. I think it's an exciting time. I think if you were having this panel a few decades ago and we're talking about a computer or the internet, you would probably not have forecast what has actually happened here. And I suspect AI will be the same. So it's really hard to look into the future. I think, kind of like I mentioned with communication, I think trying to embrace it, maybe a little bit cautiously, embrace it, but see what you can do with it. If it can save you money, then it has value.
Yeah, I'd say we're at that kind of cautionary point in time where there's a lot of people flooding that marketplace, a lot of exciting things out there, and we really need to kind of tease out, what's the cream of the crop, what's kind of out there in that space. So it's going to be a learning experience for all of us up here on the stage, everyone out there using it. But I see things as continuing to make applications more precise, continuing to narrow in our recommendations as we get some of these machine learning things across the field several times. We're going to have the ability to know a lot more about our fields than we ever have, down to the square inch. It's a matter of how we are able to utilize that data. That is one of my unknowns at this point.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that AI technology is going to be a game changer. I had the luxury of participating in the introduction of biotechnology through my previous employer. And I think AI and the utilization of AI is going to be just as significant in agriculture. So here's the thing. So today, one of those machines is 6 feet wide and costs $1 million. So that's going to change very rapidly. I think in 10 years, those are going to be field scale machines and they're going to be affordable. But the one caution that I have is some people say, well, we don't need it, in the future, we're not going to need any herbicides anymore. We're going to use lasers, or we're going to use flame, or we're going to use hot water, and it's going to put all of these herbicides out of business. not so fast. I talk a lot about an integrated approach in my presentations, and I see AI integrating with some of the other techniques that we're currently using, and overall, it's just going to improve the way that we can manage pests on the farm.
Thank
Now,
you. Go
I
ahead,
was
Joe.
going to add to that real quick because I know, Tom, you like talking about having a finisher.
Yes.
And that's where I
Closer.
see closer. Sorry, yes. That's where I see some of these in the more of the short to mid-term is that they may be expensive until the cost comes down. There's going to be, whether it's companies or agronomists out there kind of offering, here's the package deal, and then we'll have this laser machine come in here and clean up whatever escapes. Be the closer.
Exactly. Exactly. It's not going to provide general weed control in May. It's going to be useful at the end of the season.
So thank you all very much for coming here today. I've tried to ask as many questions that I think you would like to ask. Do you have anybody has any question or so that would like to ask the panel that I have not covered? Feel free.
Time for one question.
Time for one question?
Somebody's got to ask a question.
All right, a quick one then, since I'll ask on their behalf. What technology do you believe will be the easiest one or the one that will probably be coming up fastest? And nobody will prove you if you're wrong. Nobody will tell you anything there. Just give us your best bet. Start with Tom.
I'm going to defer to Joe. Go ahead.
Joe, go ahead. What about drones? And can you use them for spot spraying or can you use them for special applications?
In the spraying spot, I'm just going to group it into targeted applications, whether that's a see and spray type technology or a drone, these more targeted applications, whether that's at the beginning of the year or to close out at the end of the year. That's where we're going to go with the quickest short-term thing that's going to be adopted.
And I like the field edges. I think right now we're missing those, and that's where maybe the drone technology, Mohammed, can help us. Places where we have to worry about endangered species or up against sensitive crops. I think the drone technology is a real helper in those places.
And for the disease guys, can you use technology for maybe identifying diseases or pests in the field? Will that be beneficial to you guys a little bit?
Yeah, it's a little trickier, right? Even the pathologist standing over one sometimes can't quite get it right. But the technology is improving to the point where you could identify a problem area, right? You still have to ground truth it, but that can save you some time if you could identify a problem area. You still often have to get in and figure out if it's a root rot or a fertility thing or whatever, but that's happening. We see that.
All right, it's now 2:30, and I would like to thank you very much for your time here, and thank you most of all for attending. Thank you for funding our research and our extension activities, and most of all, thank you for using our resources that we provide so that you can provide us with good food, with good feed, and with fun. All of those who have the flowers around your gardens, we really enjoy those. So thank you for coming. Thank you all. Have a fun day.